Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Cowes. Welcome to the Round the Island race, and welcome to the Island Sailing Club. For those of you who haven't got a clue who I am, I'm Dave Atkinson. I am the race director. I've been doing this job, believe it or not, for 46 years. So I know a little bit about the race, but I'm still learning. So, what are we here to? We're here to find out about the weather. There's a couple of things I'm going to say right up front so everybody knows what's going on. We are not... Is that better? Oh, good. So, right now, we have no intention of cancelling any classes. So, have a good day. There's a few things that you need to do, and I would suggest you go on the portal, and there's a list of things you need to check through to make sure you do it, so you have a good day, and even better, we have a good day. Because we don't spend all the time that we should be doing all sorts of other things in resolving issues. We don't mind, but you help us tremendously by just go to that list of 10 things and doing it. Number 10 on that list is the best one of all. And have a good day and come back here and have a beer, which I think every one of you probably will deserve after tomorrow. So, without further ado, can I introduce to you two people on my right, who are the gurus, who are going to tell you how things are going to pan out tomorrow. Firstly, Penny Tranter. Now, you remember last year Penny gave us a rather interesting forecast, which sort of came true, and sort of didn't, because at times we got a bit more than everyone thought. So hopefully this year we're not going to get that. On the end there, we've got Tom Cheney from B&G. He's a top-class sailor. He's a navigator on all sorts of things, so he can guide you around the island. So, what I will do without further ado, I will pass you over to them to take you through tomorrow. As I say, have a good day. Come back safely and have a beer.
Thank you very much, Dave, and good evening, everyone. So, starting off with the weather brief, I'd just like to say that it is going to be unseasonably windy for early June. So there are very much similarities to last year's weather in that it is going to be unseasonably windy. We have got low pressure dominating our weather, which is going to be to the north of us. So we are going to see some lively winds coming in between the west and the southwest. And the afternoon is when we expect the peak of those winds. And currently, the highest gusts somewhere around 34 to 36 knots. Earlier this morning, the models were suggesting we might see gusts as high as 40 knots. So I just want to say that this is quite a complex weather pattern we have for tomorrow, and it has been changing quite a lot over the last few days. So I just want to say that this forecast has a little bit of uncertainty. So just be aware, please, of that. So I just wanted to start off by saying, on the weather chart that you can see, hopefully on the big screen, which is at midnight tonight, can you see that we've got a trough over Ireland, and to the south of that, we have sort of 2 or 3 weather fronts. So what's going to happen is that we are going to have a bit of a jet stream go over the top of those weather fronts, and by the time we get to midday tomorrow, so by the time we get to midday tomorrow, we'll see a low stroke trough over the central part of England, and it'll be what we call in the profession a flat wave. So we'll see a warm front come through in the morning, and we'll see a cold front coming through later in the afternoon. And it's the squeeze in the isobars ahead of the cold front which we expect to result in the peak of those winds. Now, once the cold front is gone through, sort of late afternoon, early evening, we're expecting the winds to veer and become more west to west-northwesterly and start to decrease through the evening. So that's the low pressure. The other thing about this low pressure is it's quite complex, and so we're going to see quite a lot of frontal cloud, but we're also going to see a lot of convective cloud. So we're going to see big cumulus, and we're also potentially going to see some cumulonimbus. So these are the sort of clouds that we can expect. And at the top there, you can see that we've got some darker cloud, and that's indicative of sort of squally showers or, some squally rain. And what we can expect is that this type of cloud is something to watch out for, because underneath it or around it, you are going to see shifts in the wind direction and also change in speed. So it could become quite squally, followed by sudden lulls. So we'll see the wind speed going up and down quite a bit. And if you do see the clouds towering up, as you can see on the left, bottom left of that graphic there, then those are cumulonimbus clouds, and those are the clouds that can really give some quite heavy showers, perhaps even squally, even thundery. So the other thing I need to just flag up to you is that the Met Office have issued a low-level thunderstorm warning between 0900 and 1800 tomorrow. And as well as squally winds, there is a risk, obviously, of lightning and potentially an outside risk of hail. So we just need to be aware of that as well. I think most of the heavy thunderstorms will be over the mainland, but we could see a few coming across Isle of Wight and the surrounding waters. So that's just something else to be aware of. Okay, so for the start then, the three graphics there on the right-hand side are just to show that there is a chance, a risk of some squally showers. Please don't take that as verbatim. It's just to indicate the kind of showery pattern we're likely to see at the start. I'm just going to have to wander over because I want to get the exact winds for this one. So what we're looking at to start off with is sort of south-southwest to west-southwest, 8 to 12 knots, gusting 15 to 22 knots. So that'll be early on, and then it will increase up to 12 to 15 knots, gusting 20 to 25 knots, especially in any of the heavier showers. As far as the sea state goes, we're looking at sort of choppy stroke moderate, and the high tide at Cowes is at 08:50 tomorrow morning. So that's the start. For stage one then, we keep the winds pretty much as I mentioned before, but what we will see is a steady increase through the latter morning, so that by noon they'll have gone round a little bit to 230 to 260, 18 to 25 knots, with gusts up to 30 knots, especially in any of the heavier rain or showers. Again, we just need to be aware that the wind will be with the flood tide until high tide, and as well as the high tide at Cowes at 08:50, it will be 09:07 at Hurst Narrows. So you can see that the wind will be with the tide, but then it will be changing. And we will see some quite squally winds, particularly if you see any dark clouds, any heavy showers as well. So Tom is now going to talk about tactics for stage one of the race. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Goodness me, thank goodness for that. So actually, this morning I was thinking this was shaping up to be a very similar forecaster last year, and I thought we were going to have to stand here and do exactly the same talk that we did last year. But actually, I think this afternoon it does look like it's moderated a bit. Luckily, last year, I, like a few of you, ignored Penny's advice, and we did do a little lap of the island, and it was fairly windy. I think it should be quite a lot more pleasant than that this year. And there's a few other little differences to last year, or sort of what most of us experience in a normal around the island. So stage one, which is what we're calling Here to the Needles. Actually, if you're in the earlier starts, as Penny said, high water's like 9 o'clock, just before 9 o'clock. So it's actually going to be an interesting start for a lot of people, because you'll be starting on a pretty slack tide, or maybe even a little bit of tide against you still at this end of the Solent. And actually, if that's the case for your start, then the best tide for you is probably over towards the mainland side, where the tide turns first. So we might see people hedging towards the mainland on that first half of that leg. And I've also seen a few of those like local Solent models that do have some quite soft bits, as well as the potential squally bits. So I think it's going to be quite interesting for a lot of people trying to choose their setup for that first leg, where you might well be starting in, with the tide taking a couple of knots off the wind speed. So you might want quite a J2 or J3 on the start, and then actually by the time you do get towards St. Cat's, there is positive tide for nearly everyone most of the way up that first beat. So by the time you get to the Needles or towards Hurst, you're going to have quite a lot of tide with you taking you there, and then obviously you're going to have a building breeze, so could get quite lumpy. And actually, that's often the best way to look for that positive tide, is to look for that lumpy water as you get halfway up the Western Solent, and stay in the lumpy bits. That's what's going to get you towards where you're trying to get to. And then obviously the end of that first leg is probably the bit that lots of the navigators are going to find the most stressful, trying to get around that corner with tide taking you down towards the shingles and the wreck that is in that corner. I think if we go to the next slide, you can see the current kind of ends up taking you, those times aren't quite right, but taking you out towards, out onto the bank. And then if you go on to that next slide, we see that there's this wreck on the corner that I'm hoping most of you know about. That's the thing that most people are going to be worried about. And in a forecast like tomorrow, unless you're really sure about what you're doing, it's probably a good idea to be quite conservative on that corner. I'll hand you back to Penny for the next leg of weather.
Thanks very much, Tom. So stage 2, which takes us from the Needles round to St. Catherine's Point. We're going to be keeping the winds that we have seen through the Western Solent, still coming in from between 230 to 260, 12 to 18 knots, gusts 20 to 28, but we will see that increase by noon by a few knots. And then potentially, if you're still in that area in the afternoon, we could see the wind just pick up a little bit more, 18 to 26 knots, gusting maybe 32 to 36 knots, particularly if you're in and around any of those heavy showers or heavy rain. So the sea state on the back side of the island is going to be really quite choppy. And I think, as Tom has already alluded to, it's going to be quite lumpy. We're going to see rough seas. We've obviously had the strong winds of today helping to build up the seas. As far as the tides are concerned, we've got high at 0856 at Freshwater and 1441 for the low at Freshwater Bay. So that's the stage 2 weather from the Needles to St. Catherine's. Now over to the tactics. Again, back to you, Tom.
So as Penny said, kind of could be quite a bit of variation in the wind direction on that leg. When we were looking at this on our boat yesterday, we were kind of looking at that leg being very reachy. I think some of the later models have it being, the wind being slightly more towards properly in the southwest. We had a lot of south in the forecast a few days ago. So sail selection on this leg is going to be quite a challenge for a lot of people. The Western Solent, whatever the forecast is for out there, is nearly always going to end up being a fairly true beat. So I think my advice for this next leg is, have in your head what you think the true wind direction is going to be in the forecast, or look at some observations for that leg, so that you can set yourself up at, heading towards that corner, kind of knowing what you're hedging towards for, whether you're on a reaching spinnaker, or whether you're just going to stick with the jib or what. But have that in your head, and make that decision before, so that when you get safely past the wreck, you can go into plan A. Obviously, for nearly everybody, the whole of this leg is going to be in pretty strong tide against you, and that's going to try and force you to hedge inshore to stay out of that worst tide. The rum line actually keeps you on kind of just on the best side of the current without sailing too far. And if you go inshore of the rum line, there are a couple of traps you can get into where you can sail into what feels like a nice deep bit of water, and then there's actually a few ledges that poke out that can catch you out. So just have that in mind. And then actually just, if you end up setting a kite and going into that little bay before St. Cat's, just make sure you leave yourself lots of room in case you need to drop the kite to come up and get out of there around the headland.
So moving on to stage 3 of the weather. So stage 3 is from St. Catherine's up to Bembridge. And I did mention that it's going to really be quite choppy around the back of the island, rough seas. And what we're looking at is somewhere between 2 and 3 metre waves is what is being forecast and as expected at the moment. So again, the afternoon is really going to be the peak of the winds. So we're looking at 230 to 260, 18 to 26 knots, and gusting possibly into the low to mid 30s, especially in and around any heavy showers. Once we get into the late afternoon, early evening, if you're still out, you'll see the winds starting to veer, and they'll come round to 250 to 290, and they will start to ease. They'll take a while to ease, but you will also see the showers will start to ease as well. And that's indicative of that cold, showery front passing overhead. So the high tide at Ventnor is 0916 and 0941 at Bembridge, and low tide at Ventnor is 1428 and 1503 at Bembridge. So moving on to the tactics for stage 3. Back to you, Tom.
So, yeah, apart from the wreck you have to not hit, I would say that this is the most complicated bit of the race, and the easiest bit to make pretty big gains or losses on, depending on how you do it. In a 250, whatever we're saying the true wind direction might be at this point, St. Cat's to Dunnows is pretty much a VMG downwind for you. So you're going to be sailing downwind in quite strong wind against tide. We're saying 3 metre waves and 20 knots of breeze. That could be pretty lumpy. And the easiest way to deal with that is to stay inshore. And it's really obvious when you're there. You can see this nice flat water close to the beach, and it's a case of kind of trying to get in there and stay there really if you can. Which, for those of you that have got symmetrical spinnakers, you want to square back and sail the deep side of your VMG numbers there to stay in the shallow water, and it makes it pretty hard for anyone who's got a bow up a sailboat, because you find it pretty hard not to end up spending quite a lot of time in that deep water in the bad current. So yeah, if you can hedge towards inshore, that's certainly the easiest way to make some gains on that first half of the leg. And then Sandown Bay, which is the bay between Dunnows and Bembridge, normally you would kind of advise against going into Sandown Bay. It's normally a bit of a hole, and there's normally a wind bend the wrong way for what you're trying to achieve. But actually, tomorrow, if you're in a smaller boat and the sea state's pretty horrible at that point, you might find that you're just going a lot quicker, staying out of the worst of it and going into the bay. And then, just setting yourself up for that corner. And then, are we into me on the next bit? So just round that corner, this is where, as Penny said, the forecast is for it to be windiest, probably when most people are on this kind of bit of the race, early afternoon. And actually, with the breeze coming over the land, it often ends up particularly gusty and puffy, in those bits of the race course. So normally you're gonna be reaching from Bembridge past the exclusion zone, and you're probably going to be just on a jib at this point, I'd have thought, or maybe on a reaching sail, and you really need to keep your eyes out for those puffs and take the height in the lulls and go down a bit in those big gusts. This is going to be, it's quite hard to talk about the current here at this point because there's going to be quite a lot of spread in the fleet, but depending on when you get here, a lot of boats are still going to be against the current. And so hedging towards Ryde, and obviously Ryde sands are never where the map says. That's the main thing you can be certain of. If the chart says there's deep water there probably isn't. So just kind of look at your depth sensors as you're going around that corner and work out how conservative you want to be. It's quite soft if you do hit it, but Penny.
Thank you, Tom. So just on the back of what Tom has said, once you get into the Eastern Solent, the winds aren't expected to be as strong as round the back of the island. But if you're in the Eastern Solent during the afternoon, that's still when the peak of the winds are going to be seen. But the seas will be much less, still quite choppy and moderate. So looking at the summary then, and I'll just give an overview once again. So we've got low pressure dominating tomorrow's race. We're going to see the peak of the winds, which are going to come in from between the sort of south-southwest to west-southwest during the afternoon. And that's ahead of that cold front. Behind it, the winds will veer to west-southwest to west-northwest. So for the start then, just to reiterate, 225 to 260, 8 to 12 knots, gusting 15 to 22 knots, but increasing to 12 to 15 knots, gusting 20 to 25 knots, particularly if you are near any showers, any heavy squally showers. And just to reiterate, that thunderstorm warning from the Met Office, low level, is out between 0900 and 1800. So the winds during the race, lightest really at the start and in the sort of evening time. Between that, the winds are going to be at their peak in the afternoon, and with the biggest seas round the back of the island. If you're interested in temperatures, over the sea they're going to be 14 to 16 Celsius, and the actual sea surface temperature is 14 or 15 Celsius. So that is the summary for the weather brief. I don't know if Tom's got anything else he would like to say further.
I don't think so. I think that's very good. Lots of changeable weather. Use your eyes, I think.
Penny, Tom, thank you very much. Brilliant as always. Before we let you go, has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask? Anybody? Okay, well, I hope you all have a good race tomorrow, and we look forward to seeing you at the prize giving on Sunday, 12 o'clock, to receive your prizes. Have a great race. Thank you.